Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. Glad to be back with you. As always, we're going to continue reading our book, By the Shores of Silver Lake, by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Yesterday, if you remember, they got a nice surprise in the evening when Mr. Boast came back with his new bride, Mrs. Boast. So they all slept in the house together. Let's see how their Christmas went. When Laura heard the door shut as Pa and Mr. Boast went out to do the morning chores, she dressed, shuddering in the cold, and hurried downstairs to help Ma get breakfast. But Mrs. Boast was helping Ma. The room was warm from the glowing stove. Mush was frying on the long griddle. That'd be cornmeal mush, probably. I don't know if you've ever made it. It's very good. If you could also ask your parent to make it if they haven't tried it. Make cornmeal mush, and I like to put milk and sugar in mine, and then when it gets cold you put it like in a pan, like a bread pan, and you slice it thin, little slices, kind of like my finger, only they'll be deeper, and then you fry that in butter. Woohoo, so good. So that's what they're going to have for their special Christmas breakfast. The tea kettle was boiling and the table was set. "Merry Christmas, Ma," said Ma and Mrs. Boast said together. "Merry Christmas," Laura answered, but she was staring at the table. At each place, the plate was turned bottom up over a knife and fork as usual. But on the plate's bottoms were packages, small packages and larger packages, some wrapped in colored tissue paper, excuse me, and others in plain wrapping paper tied with colored string. "You see, Laura, we didn't hang up stockings last night," said Ma, "so we will take our presents off the breakfast table." Laura went back upstairs and told Mary and Carrie about the Christmas breakfast table. "Ma knew where we hid all the presents but hers," she said. "They are all on the table." "But we can't have presents," Mary wailed, horrified. "There isn't anything for Mr. and Mrs. Boast." "Ma will fix it," Laura answered. "She told me so last night." "How can she?" Mary asked. "We didn't know they were coming." "There isn't anything that we could give them." "Ma can fix anything," said Laura, and she took Ma's present from Mary's box and held it behind her when they all went downstairs together. Carrie stood between her and Ma while Laura quickly put the package on Ma's plate. There was a little package on Mrs. Boast's plate and another on Mr. Boast's plate. "Oh, I can't wait," Carrie whispered, squeezing her thin hands together. Her peaked face was white, and her eyes were big and shiny. "Yes, you can. We've got to," said Laura. It was easier for Grace. She was so little she didn't notice the Christmas table. But even Grace was so excited that Mary could hardly button her up. "Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!" Grace shouted, wiggling, and then she was free to run about, shouting until Ma told her gently that children must be seen and not heard. "Come here, Grace, and you can see out," said Carrie. She had blown and wiped a clear space from the frost on the window. And there they stayed, taking turns looking out, till at last Carrie said, "Here they come." After a loud stomping off of snow into the lean-to, Pa and Mr. Boast came in. "Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!" they all cried. Grace ran behind Ma and clung to her steps, peeping around at the strange man. Pa picked her up and tossed her just like he used to toss Laura when she was little. And Grace screamed with laughter just like, I have something on my glasses, just like Laura had done when she was younger. Do you remember being tossed up in the air, or seeing some other kids tossed and they were caught? Oh, so much fun. That's much better. Let's see. And Grace screamed with laughter just like Laura used to. Laura had to remember hard that she was now a big girl, and she couldn't laugh too loud. They were all so happy in the warmth, full of good smells of cooking, and with company there for Christmas in the snug house. The light from the frost-furred windows was silvery. And just as they all sat down to the exciting Christmas table, the eastern window turned golden. The light was shining in. Outdoors, the stillness of the whole vast snowy prairie was full of sunshine. "You first, Mrs. Boast," said Ma. For Mrs. Boast was company. So she opened her package. In it was a lawn handkerchief. That's the type of material, edged with a narrow crocheted lace. Laura recognized it. It was Ma's best Sunday handkerchief. Miss Boast was delighted and so surprised that there was a gift for her. So was Mr. Boast. His present was wristlets knitted in stripes of red and gray. So that would be something to put over his jacket or coat to keep the air from blowing in. Ma had knitted them for Pa, but sorry about that. Ma had knitted them for Pa, but she could knit some more for Pa, and the company must have Christmas presents. Pa said his new socks were exactly what he needed. The cold from the snow had been going right through his boots, and he admired the necktie that Laura had made. "I'll put this on right after breakfast," he said. "By George, now I'll be all dressed up for Christmas." Everyone exclaimed when Ma unwrapped her pretty apron. She put it on at once and stood up for them all to see. She looked at the hem and smiled at Carrie. "You hem very nicely, Carrie," she said, and then she smiled at Laura. "And Laura's gathers are even and well spaced. It's a nice apron." "There's more, Ma," Carrie cried out. "Look in the pocket." Ma took out the handkerchief. She was so surprised. And to think that very morning she had given away her Sunday best handkerchief. She was given another one. Now, it was as if this had all been planned, though none of it had been planned. But of course, this could not be said in Mrs. Boast's hearing. Ma only looked at the handkerchief's tiny hem and said, "Such a pretty handkerchief, too. Thank you, Mary." Then everyone admired Mary's bed shoes and how they'd been made of the ends of worn-out old blanket. Mrs. Boast said she was going to make some for herself as soon as any of her blankets were worn out, that is. Carrie put on her mittens and softly clapped her hands. "My 4th of July mittens. Oh, see my 4th of July mittens," she said. Then Laura opened her package, and in it was an apron made of the same calico as Ma's. It was smaller than Ma's and had 2 pockets. A narrow ruffle was all around it, and Ma had cut of the other curtain. Carrie had sewn all the seams. Mary had hemmed the ruffle. All that time Ma hadn't known, and Laura hadn't known, they were each making an apron for the other one from those old curtains. And Mary and Carrie had been almost bursting with the secret because they knew. "Oh, thank you," Laura said, smoothing down the pretty white calico with the red flowers scattered over it. Such tiny stitches in the ruffle. Mary, I do thank you." Then came the best part of all. Everyone watched while Ma put on the little blue coat on Grace and smoothed the swan down collar. She put the lovely swan's down hood over Grace's golden hair. Now see, they didn't put the hood attached to the coat, it was separate. A bit of blue silk lining showed around Grace's face and matched her shining eyes. She touched the fluffy, soft swan's down on her wrist and waved her hands and laughed. She was so beautiful and happy, blue and white and gold, and alive and laughing that they could not look at her long enough. But Ma did not want to spoil her with too much attention. So, too soon, she quieted Grace and laid away the coat and hood in the bedroom. Let's see what she looks like. Oh, she does look adorable. There she is. There was still another package beside Laura's plate, and she saw that Mary and Carrie and Grace each had one like it. All at once they unwrapped them, and each found a little pink cheesecloth bag full of candy. "Christmas candy!" Carrie cried, and "Christmas candy!" Laura and Mary said at the same time. "However, did Christmas candy get here?" Mary asked. "Why, didn't Santa Claus get here on Christmas Eve?" said Pa. So almost all at once they said, "Oh, Mr. Boast, thank you. Thank you, and Mrs. Boast." Then Laura gathered up all the paper wrappings, and she helped Ma set the table with a big platter of golden fried mush, a plate of hot biscuits, a dish of fried potatoes, a bowl of codfish gravy, and a glass dish full of dried applesauce. "I'm sorry we have no butter," said Ma. "Our cow gives so little milk that we can't make butter anymore." But the codfish gravy was good on the mush, and the potatoes, and nothing could taste better than the hot biscuits with applesauce. Such a breakfast as that, like Christmas, came only once a year. And there was still the Christmas dinner to come on the same day. After breakfast, Pa and Mr. Boast went with the team to get Mr. Boast's bobsled. They took shovels to dig the snow away so the horses could pull it out of the slough. Then Mary took Grace on her lap in the rocking chair, and while Carrie made the beds and swept, Ma and Laura and Mrs. Boast put on their aprons, rolled up their sleeves, and washed the dishes and got dinner. Mrs. Boast was great fun. She was interested in everything and eager to learn how Mom managed so well. "When you haven't had milk enough to have sour milk, however do you have such delicious biscuits, Laura?" she asked. "Why, you just use sourdough," Laura said. Mrs. Boast had never heard of sourdough biscuits. It was fun to show her. Laura measured out the cups of sourdough, put in the soda, baking soda that is, and salt and flour, and rolled out the biscuits on the board. "But how do you make the sourdough?" Mrs. Boast asked. "You start it," said Ma, "by putting some flour and warm water in a jar and letting it sit there till it sours. When you use it, always leave a little," said Laura, "and put the scraps of biscuit dough like this in more warm water." Laura put it in the warm water and cover it. She put the clean cloth and the plate on the jar and just set it by a warm place. She set it on its place by the shelf on the stove, and it's always ready to use whenever you want it that way. "I've never tasted such good biscuits," said Mrs. Boast. With such good company, the morning seemed to go by in a minute. Dinner was almost ready when Pa and Mr. Bose came back with the bobsled. The enormous jackrabbit was browning in the oven. Potatoes were boiling, and the coffee pot bubbled on the back of the stove. That's different than the way we have coffee pots now that drip down. They used to boil, or when I was a young girl, they had percolators. Had a top and a little tube went up it, and when the water boiled, it would make this really cool sound. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Oh, I loved it. But they were boiling theirs. The house was full of good smells of roasting meat, hot breads, and coffee. Pa sniffed when he came in. "Don't worry, Charles," said Ma. "You smell coffee, but the kettle is boiling to make your tea." "Good. Tea's a man's drink in cold weather," Pa told her. Laura spread the table with clean white tablecloth, and in the center of the table she set a glass bowl. The glass pitcher was full of cream, and the glass spoon holder full of silver spoons, all standing on their handles. Around the table, Carrie laid the knives and forks, filled the water glasses, while Laura set all the plates in a pile at Pa's place. Do you think Pa's going to get all the food? Then, at each place, all around the table, she cheerfully put some glass sauce dish holding half a canned peach in golden syrup. The table was beautiful. Pa and Mr. Bose had washed and combed their hair. Ma had put on the last empty pot and pan in the pantry and helped Laura, and Mrs. Bose whisked the last full dish to the table. Quickly, she and Laura took off their work aprons and tied on their Christmas aprons. "Come, Charles," said Ma, "dinner's ready." "Come, Bose," said Pa. "Sit up and eat hearty. There's plenty more down cellar in a teacup." Before Pa, on the big platter, lay the huge roasted rabbit, with piles of bread and onion stuffing steaming around it. From a dish on one side stood a mound of mashed potatoes, and on the other side stood a bowl of rich brown gravy. There were plates of hot Johnny cake and small hot biscuits. There was a dish of cucumber pickles. Ma poured the strong brown coffee and the fragrant tea, while Pa heaped each plate with roast stuffing and potatoes and gravy. You know, that is something that people used to do. The father would load the plates with food and then pass them. Now we usually pass the containers of food. "This is the first time we ever had a jackrabbit for Christmas dinner," Pa said. "The other times we lived where jackrabbits grew, they were just too common. We had them for every day. For Christmas we had wild turkey." "Yes, Charles, and that was the most we did have," said Ma. "There was no surveyor's pantry to get pickles and peaches out of in Indian Territory." "Seems to me this is the best rabbit I ever tasted," said Mr. Bose. "The gravy is extra good, too." "Hunger is the best sauce," Ma replied modestly. But Mr. Bose said, "I know why the rabbit's so good. Mrs. Ingles lays thin slices of salt pork over it when she roasts it." Why, yes, I do," Ma agreed. "I think it does improve the flavor." They all took big second helpings. Then Pa and Mr. Bose took big third helpings. And Mary and Laura and Carrie did not refuse, but Ma only took a small bit of stuffing, and Mrs. Bose only one more biscuit. "I declare I'm so full I couldn't eat another mouthful," she said. When Pa took up the fork from the platter again, Ma warned him, "Save some room, Charles. You and Mr. Bose." "You don't mean there's more to come?" said Pa. Then Ma stepped into the pantry and brought out the dried apple pie. They had dried apples during apple season so they could have special things. Pie, said Pa. An apple pie, said Mr. Bose. Jumping Jehoshaphat, I wish I'd known this was coming. Slowly they each ate a piece of that apple pie, and Pa and Mr. Bose divided the one piece left over. I hope never to eat a better Christmas dinner, said Mr. Bose with a deep sigh of fullness. Well, Pa said, it's the first Christmas dinner anybody ever ate in this part of the country. I'm glad it was a good one. In time to come, no doubt, a good many folks will celebrate Christmas around here, and I expect they'll have fancier fixings in some ways, but I don't know how they could have a more solid comfort than we've got. That's for a fact. After a while, he and Mr. Bose got up reluctantly, and Ma began to clear the table. I'll do the dishes, she said to Laura. You run help Mrs. Bose get settled. So Laura and Mrs. Bose put on their coats, hoods and mufflers and mittens and went out into the glittering, biting cold. Laughing, they plowed and plunged through the snow to the tiny house nearby that had been the surveyor's office. At its door, Pa and Mr. Bose unloaded the bobsled. The little house had no floor, and it was so small that the double bedstead just fitted across one end. Oh, they're going to live in it. In the corner by the door, Pa and Mr. Bose set up the stove. Laura helped Mrs. Bose carry the feather bed and the quilts to make the bed. Then they set the table against the window opposite the stove and pushed 2 chairs under it. Mrs. Bose's trunk squeezed between the table and the bed and made another seat. A shelf above the stove and a box beside it held dishes, and just room enough was left for the door to open against the table. There, Pa said, when all done. Now you folks are settled. Come on over. Not even the 4 of us can get in here, but there's plenty of room at the other house. So that's headquarters. How about a game of checkers, Bose? You go along, Mrs. Bose told them. Laura and I will be there in a minute. When they were gone, Mr. Bose took a full paper bag from under the dishes. It's for a surprise, she told Laura. Popcorn. Rob doesn't know I brought it. They smuggled the bag into the house and hid it in the pantry, whispering to Ma what it was. And later, when Pa and Mr. Bose were absorbed in checkers, quietly they heated fat in the iron kettle and poured in a handful of shelled popcorn. At the first crackle, Pa looked around quickly. Popcorn? He exclaimed. I haven't tasted popcorn since. If I'd known you'd brought popcorn, Bose, I'd have routed it out of you before now. I didn't bring popcorn, Mr. Bose said. Then he cried out, Nell, you rascal. You two go on with your game, Mrs. Bose told him, laughing at him with her blue eyes. You're too busy to notice us. Yes, Charles, said Ma, don't let us disturb your checkers. I've got you beat anyway, Bose, said Pa. No, you haven't, Mr. Bose contradicted. Ma dipped the snowy kernels from the kettle into the milk pan, and Laura carefully salted them. They popped another kettleful, and the pan would hold no more. Then Mary and Laura and Carrie had a plate full of crispy, crackling, melting soft corn, and Pa and Ma and Mr. and Mrs. Bose sat around the pan, eating and talking and laughing till chore time and supper time and the time when Pa would play the fiddle. Every Christmas is better than the Christmas before, Laura thought. I guess it must be because I'm growing up. Well, that sounds like a great Christmas. Do you have any idea yet what you're going to be doing for Christmas? I hope it will be a lot of fun. Or maybe you celebrate Hanukkah. And if you do, Jesus celebrated Hanukkah. I hope that's really a lot of fun too. Well, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to pray blessings on you and yours, in your house and out of your house, in the day and in the night. And whatever you do, keep dreaming. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do. Give me a thumbs up and share this video if you'd like to help my channel grow. If you know anybody else you think might like it. I like to share things on Facebook a lot of times, but you can share it anywhere you want. So that will help me a lot. I have 331 subscribers now, but I'm hoping by Christmas I can have 350. All right, well, good night and God bless you.